make your thanks to the new people that have joined us. Morning, JR. Thank you for your comment. Great to see already people are using the chat function. So that's fantastic. So just a little bit about us. My name is David Hudson. I have over 25 years experience. As you can see there, I'm with my team, Kirsty and Connor, and we are an outsourced HR department. I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the session. So what are we going to cover today? So I'm planning today to give you a fairly high level, simple view of employment law, which is, I'm sure, by reason of you being here, you realize isn't actually that straightforward at all. So I'm going to try and demystify some of it for you. We're going to look at basic employment law principles, moving to looking at discrimination risks, family-friendly rights, managing absences. We'll then have a look at managing disciplinary and grievance processes, performance and capability management, dismissing underperformers, and then at the end, I'll give you a short update of the impending employment law changes that the Labour government has been talking about. Just a little bit about our webinars for those of you that are first. They are informal webinars. I am looking to provide you with very straightforward explanations, but also to provide you with how some of these things are interacting with the clients that we deal with extensively each day. I would invite you, please, to use the chat function. I'm sure, having lived through COVID and everything else, you'll be very familiar with Zoom. But if you just look at your function bar, you'll see a chat function there. Please feel free to drop questions in, and also there'll be a chance to ask questions at the end of this session. So. And beyond that, there'll be a chance for us to connect and talk about anything particular that you might be concerned about. And again, I'll talk to you about that at the end of this session. So thank you. Really good to see people already interacting. It's always, I'm sure, quite odd sometimes just to talk to your computer screen and no one responds. So really appreciating that. Thank you very much. So that being said, let's make a start. I'm interested to hear, based on why you've joined us today, what worries you most about HR and employment law in your organisation, or for you as a manager or a business owner? Do please know there's no right or wrong answers. This really is just about getting you to think about why you're here, and for me, maybe to customise some of the content that we've got. So over to you. If you can drop some comments into the chats box, please, that would be helpful. Don't be shy. We do often find people come to us for these webinars because they have something in particular in mind. So do also drop in the topic maybe that's important to you. Thank you, Tony. Managing performance. Fantastic. Feel free to share to other thoughts. Make sure that we are covered legally. Absolutely, Olivia. Thank you. Balancing, being kind, we're sticking to the law. Yeah. Very tricky, Nolan. Good, Erica, good shout there. And latest updates. Yes, absolutely, Nolan. Thank you. Okay, super. So the way I'm going to take us through this is I'm going to take us from the start of employment to the end of employment, and I will be sure to include those points that you've put in the chat function there. So thank you for that. So first and foremost, what we always recommend is that you have the right things in place at the start, and the recruitment part of the employee life cycle is critical to that. It's probably here where you have one of the most important legal obligations as the employer, and that is to undertake right to work checks. I will tell you that we are seeing an increase in the Home Office audits that are happening. With digitalization, that's arguably making right to work checks easier, but ever so often we see that companies haven't completed right to work checks, or are behind. So visas may have run out, passports may have expired. So I would urge you, if you're taking anything away from this webinar, this is one of the things to get into. Contextually, it is illegal, as you will know, to employ workers that don't have the right to work, the penalty for which can be up to £20,000 per worker, and can also lead to the business owner being imprisoned if it's shown that that was a deliberate act. So the way that I always recommend you do that is to make sure that right to work checks are incorporated into your new starter process. We always recommend technically to try and do your right to work checks when you are starting the interview process. So it doesn't hurt to ask people to bring their paperwork in so that you can check that. The other important point here in terms of your legal obligation is that you are issuing the correct employment paperwork, and that's what we call a day one obligation. So now it is a legal requirement that a person has to have a contract of employment before or on the day that they start. And if they don't, then there is a penalty that they can claim for that. So not only do you need to make sure that you are issuing that, but also that what you have in it is the correct information. And again, I'll share with you. Many people don't recognize that actually that's really quite a legislated area. The order of things that go into employment offers are mandated. And again, I'll talk a bit about that just down the line. The next key requirement for you that's a mandatory requirement is that your employees have the right to be enrolled in an through auto enrollment into a pension scheme. That will be dependent on them hitting particular financial triggers, earning triggers, but you will need to make sure that you've got pensions set up. There are some really good pension schemes that you can join that are fairly, fairly cheap. People's pension comes to mind, for example. So, and all of that can be managed online. So that can be a very straightforward process. And then most importantly, your core policies, the things that you are required to have, will be the disciplinary and grievance policy, health and safety policy, and the data protection as a privacy statement that you need to share with people so they know how you're handling their data. So if we were to talk here, if we were to stop here, this would be what I'd expect you to have as an absolute minimum when you are starting out or when you're checking through where your HR processes are at the moment. The other thing is that to one of the previous points in the chat, starting off in the right place means that people will have confidence as new starters that you are a good employer. People will invariably expect a contract and a policy to be in place. But you'll also want to think beyond that in terms of basic HR practice to make sure that you've set the expectations around how you operate in the organization. What does the induction process look like? What's their role going to be? And onboarding them in a way that makes them start to immediately feel part of the organization. I'm sure that sounds very obvious. I'm sure many of you will be doing that, but you'd be surprised the number of times we come across situations where people have left early because they just weren't welcomed in a good way into the organization. So beyond getting all of the legal stuff right, what you should be thinking about is how do we treat people in a way that makes them feel welcome into the new organization. Sometimes, particularly, I find that can be a challenge where you are working with remote workers, as an example. So I always tell my clients that if you get the recruitment piece right, then actually you could probably make the HR department redundant, because if you focus on recruitment and find the right people, the rest should follow. And dare I say, so many times we find that the root cause of issues in organizations is because the right people have not been recruited, oftentimes because the process is a rush. And let's face it, we've all been there. In the busy hubbub of daily business, recruitment can sometimes be a quick must do. So do make sure you take time to focus on recruitment. It is the key success factor. You're doomed to fail, to be frank, if you're not. I like to see this in two different ways. So the way that we would expect you to recruit will be through proper presentation, advertising in the right way, following good objective selection processes, providing interviews, sending offers, and onboarding. Now, I would be fairly sure that many of you will be going through some recruitment processes or have experienced recruitment challenges. It is it's a tough market out there at the moment for candidates. And what I would say from our experience is you need to move very quick to attract and retain good talent. So make sure when you go into your recruitment process that there's no lag, if you like, so that people aren't going off to the next best offer, because candidates are not waiting around if they're good candidates. What you want to make sure you're not doing is recruiting in a very subjective or discriminatory way. You certainly don't want to go into it unplanned, so that there will be a direct correlation between the preparation you do and the thoroughness of your process versus how successful that candidate will be when they start. So do make time to recruit in the right way. And as with all things, I can certainly help you with that. One of the big things we all obviously face is discrimination risks, and those risks sadly can be present at all points of the employment life cycle from start to end. And unfortunately, we'll cover a spectrum of areas. The management of discrimination risk all really centres out from the Equality Act 2010, and we very often find ourselves talking to clients about protected characteristics. So here you'll see they will be age, disability, gender reassignment, maternity and pregnancy, marriage and civil partnership, race, religion and belief, sex and sexual orientation. The big piece really around managing discrimination is to take the position that all people will be treated equally, which principally I'm sure we all agree with, but can sometimes be difficult where you're having to maybe grade pay structures or try to balance the need for reward between part-time and full-time workers, amongst other things. So be very wary when you are in a position where you may need to treat people different for legitimate reasons, the unintended consequences that may bring. We ourselves write our policies to make sure that our clients are legally compliant and meet the required standards. And in actual fact, what we should be looking to do as organisations is to move beyond the legal requirements for for equality and show ourselves to be an embracing, open employer. Because once again, I will tell you in practice, these questions are asked to us many times in the recruitment cycle. What are people's view on on one thing or another? Do they frown on older workers? Will they allow me to go off and practice some particular religious practices? So this is ever present. Just to say here also, in terms of employment law, if you are taken for a claim and be seen to have acted discriminatory, the financial reward is uncapped, which will obviously potentially be quite significant. So that being said, we find then that all tends to then feed into the family-friendly policies that you will want to have in your organization. And these policies are built to cover each part of a potential key milestone in the employee's life, if you like. The ones that I'm sure you'll be familiar with, maternity and paternity, but there are other policies that you should consider. The rise in flexible working has been dramatic, as we know, in the last few years. That, as an example, has changed already this year. The right to request flexible working increased from once to twice, and the new Labour government is talking about mandating that right even further. So you will want to make sure you have a suite of policies, not just to have policies, but the whole purpose of having policies is that they articulate how you will treat people. They demonstrate that you are providing a consistent and statutory compliant rules to how people come to you in terms of maternity, time off for emergencies. And they will also be important in a defence situation if you're at tribunal to show that you acted in an appropriate way. So policies in themselves, whilst I'm sure it's fair to say can be seen as pretty dull, are actually quite important, and do make sure that you have those in place. Now, moving out from that, one of the key areas then, I guess, practically that we see is how do we manage absences in in work? And these can be quite complex areas to get into. So my whole piece around absence for you to think about is my experience is absolutely that if people see in the organization that you're managing absence, the spurious absences, the Monday and Friday colds tend to be less because employees know you're focused on it. If you're not, then people, to be honest, if they're in that frame of mind, will keep doing it because they know they can get away with it. So deal with absences early. There is a requirement for people to have fit notes. So you might want them to self-certify between days 1 through 7, and then doctors and now some pharmacists can provide fit notes for particular types of absence, and make sure your process is in place. And we would always recommend that you use right to work interviews as a way of tracking with the employee whether the absence itself is over a particular, milestone. So is it that they've been off 10 days already and actually the average is 6? But also these are important because if the employee is having to deal with particular medical issues that you might not be aware of, it's here that that stuff starts to surface. Again, why is that important? Bringing it off the page a bit. We are seeing instances where people are not declaring medical conditions and are going through periods of absence. And in a couple of instances, we see instances of employees making claims due to medical conditions that employers weren't aware of. So this is one of the places to capture that and to, most importantly, to support employees if there are conditions that they are having to deal with. The thing with absence as well, just to flick back, is that we see a definition between short and long-term absence as being short-term is less than 4 weeks, long-term is over 4 weeks. That's important for us because once people move into long-term absence, there tends to be a more serious issue. And we do tend to deal with long-term absence differently. We do suggest you use occupational health professionals, for example, to provide you with feedback. Because if it becomes the case that person is continually absent and you're looking at dismissal, a dismissal for medical reasons, sorry, for failure to be at work is quite a high bar to get over. So there's a lot of work has to go into dealing with long-term absence before simply just telling people that they're off and therefore you don't want them back. And believe it or not, that does happen. So robust disciplinary and grievance processes is an important area. To some of the comments that have been made, I think whilst this is purposefully focused on employment law, uh, there's a bigger piece here that's probably a whole other session about what does your culture look like? How do you set it up so that if people are underperforming, you're intervening quickly, you're giving supportive, transparent you're having transparent conversations with people to get under the skin of what's going on, rather than it feeling like a very punitive environment where the minute you do something wrong or make a mistake, you're going to be disciplined for it. So I would just urge you to think about what does your culture say about your approach to performance management. We have to recognize, in my experience, that people get to different things at different times. So if I am working for you through a probation period and maybe taking a little longer than the other person that has just come on before me, that may not mean that I'm incapable of the job. That may just mean that I need a little bit more time and space. So the other golden rule we apply here is don't rush into decisions without giving people a fair opportunity to show that they are able to meet the standards that you have set. That does translate into employment tribunal claims insofar as you will need to show if you do dismiss and you are at the end of an employment tribunal claim that you acted reasonably under the circumstances. So the tribunal judge follows, in really simple terms, a rule which is called the test of reasonableness. So was it reasonable to do that action to that person? What would a reasonable employer have done? And that does then see us needing to show that we acted fairly and sometimes not impatiently to deal with issues. The right to not be unfairly dismissed is enshrined in employment law, as is the right to be wrongly dismissed, which is a slightly different claim, and also the right to not be constructively dismissed, which is where, as an employer, you may do something that's so grievous that the employment relationship dissolves away. And there are automatically unfair rights for dismissal. So this is a very tricky area, as I'm sure you would expect. The way to get around it is to make sure that you are following a fair process. As I've just said, you are fair under all circumstances. People are given the opportunity to appeal their decisions, and that at the end of it, if dismissal is an outcome, what you can show is that you acted reasonably in all manner of ways. So you may or may not know there are actually 5 fair reasons for dismissal: capability, conduct redundancy, lack of qualification or statutory, and what we call SOSR, some other substantial reason. Just very quickly, capability, as it says, would be a dismissal whereby the individual is demonstrating they're not able to fulfill the job requirements. Conduct would be a situation where, for example, I am off sick every Monday and every Friday, and I just can't give you a reasonable explanation as to why. Redundancy, as I'm sure you know, is often the reduction in a headcount, for example. Loss or lack of qualification could be if you employ drivers and they lose their license due to a ban, or an employee is not able to show that they have the right to work in the UK. And some other substantial reason is a bit of a catch-all that we don't tend to recommend, because you have to have quite a high bar to show a dismissal under that heading. But it can, in practice, be situations where if you have employees on client sites and the employee commits a gross misconduct situation, so swears at the client or doesn't do what the client requires, then that may be a place to go to. Always recommend you take advice before dismissals. You're better off going into these things knowing what the outcomes might be than trying to muddle your way through. The other thing is that, along with the disciplinary statutory requirements, is grievances. Any of you that have been on the end of a grievance will know that these can be quite difficult, challenging, and often quite sensitive issues to deal with. Employees do have the right to raise a grievance. If they're unhappy, that tends to be that they then go into the formal grievance policy that you will have or should have in place. And there is a mechanism then to deal with that. There again, I guess, in practice, my guidance here is always that things, in my experience, tend to start to become clear early on around people being unhappy. Don't wait for employees to raise grievances. Get in and deal with those things straight away, even if they are difficult or sensitive. Because the counterpoint is that when you get into a formal grievance process, it's actually quite time consuming and can be quite distracting from running the business. So deal with grievances straight away. And there again, if you're dealing with, for example, discriminatory claims, do make sure you're taking the right advice from your HR contacts so that we can guide you through that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the upcoming Employment Rights Bill. This is if you like, the sort of heralding of Labour's view of how employment law needs to change in the UK. Just a little bit of background on that. It was a big part of Labour's manifesto that they would change within the first 100 days some quite significant pieces of employment law. And if you are reading any of their literature, what they are basically telling us is that employment law needs to be more reflective of today's society and today's working practices. So the King announced it in the King's speech. You might have seen my webinar on that, and if you haven't, head over to our YouTube channel, because that's on there. We expect, potentially, because they are looking to get it going quite quickly, that it might be in front of Parliament in October, following which it needs to have royal assent and then come into power. We don't in reality know what the detail is behind the new legislation, but this is just going to be a big change, and here's why. So first of all, Labour are looking to ban what they refer to as exploitative zero-hour contracts. And for many of our clients, zero-hour contracts are certainly not being used to exploit individuals, but you will have seen that they have had generally quite a bad rep in the media. The guidance that we have had so far on this is that there's not going to be necessarily something to replace it, but there will be an expectation that you employ people in a different way. Sorry, it sounds like a helicopter's trying to land in the garden. So that may be that you have to look at part-time working or other sort of various situations to bring people on. We rely on the detail, as I said, so I'm not going to dare I say, try and blag my way through what that might mean. But in practice, I think it could be a challenge if you are already using zero-hour workers. The second point is additional day one rights for workers. So it's often been debated around how fair employment law is, particularly where sometimes employees have to wait to qualify to inherit employment rights. The most well-known one of those is the right to make a tribunal claim, which you have to, for an unfair dismissal claim, have at the moment 2 years service to do that. Whereas what this will do is it will allow employees to make tribunal claims on day one. That we think is going to be problematic on both sides. We do think that there'll be a small window, which will be the probation period, where that right won't necessarily be in place. Again, that hasn't yet been fleshed out for us. But what it does mean is even more so making sure you've got the right things in terms of contracts and policies in place. And you will have to really focus your mind on making sure your culture's right, your managers are trained, people are being treated fairly, inductions are done well, all of those things to mitigate that potential situation of people leaving and raising a claim straight away. There's going to be a strengthening of statutory sick pay, which I think looks basically to be the removal of the first 3 qualifying days. So under statutory sick pay rules, people don't get paid the first 3 days and then statutory sick pay on the 4th. That's going, we believe, to be removed so that there's no detrimental financial impact if people are genuinely sick. It's often the case again with our clients that they will have enhanced sick pay schemes, enhanced maternity pay schemes and other things. So that may not herald a change for you. But if you are operating in an SSP situation, you will need to consider that that is going to be an increase in costs for you potentially. The flexible working piece is been slow really on the uptake. This last year, the Conservative government have put into law that you can make 2 requests for flexible working, whereas previously it had been 1 request. There'd been a change in the balance, if you like. So in the new legislation, employees are not required to convince you almost why they should be allowed to go onto flexible working. This further step is, we believe, going to be more about a strengthened right to have it rather than to request it. This is a tricky area, really. We don't see many, in truth, of these processes, of these formal requests coming through. I'm probably dealing with 3 or 4 at the moment. You can technically, if an employee asks to make change, if you both mutually agree that change is appropriate, you can make that change, and that flexible working arrangement stands. But if people are asking for things that may be more difficult for you to accommodate, or not at all, then the flexible working request process, the statutory process, is definitely one I'd recommend that you follow. And that has, out the back of it, 8 criteria that you would use to either test whether that request is acceptable, and if it's not, to use that to show the employee why. So yeah, do be aware. Often I find clients aren't aware that that is a process that they may potentially have to follow. Moving on then, I mean, this new employment rights bill has a lot around it, and so there's a move to establish a new single enforcement body. Again, and I'm sorry to keep repeating myself, what that looks like in practice, we don't know. We don't know, for example, whether that means that, like HMRC or the Home Office, they will be able to come physically into the office and make checks. What will they check? What are they enforcing? It's difficult to say, but nonetheless, that's going to be coming. Not unsurprisingly for the Labour Party, with its strong and historic associations with the unions, there's been major updates around trade union legislation and processes. Mainly, this is, I think, going to affect you if people are looking to have a trade union, which people have the right to request for a trade union presence in an organisation, albeit a slightly complicated and high bar process right now. This is essentially going to make it easier for employees to request that they join a union and that request be granted. So watch out for that. The other, I think, more extension of what we've seen is the dismissal protection for mothers returning to work. So you will have seen this year that there was further legislation passed whereby individual mothers returning to work are more protected if, for example, there's a potential redundancy situation or a dismissal situation, that there is a period of time that they are protected, which is a good thing. We don't come across, to be frank, companies that are purposefully discriminating against mothers returning to work. Where we sometimes see this being difficult is where organizations are having to downsize or relocate. And so this brings another level of checking and managing if you are in either of those places, or restructuring. If you've got employees out on maternity leave, then they will need further, that will need further investigation before you take action. So do make sure that you keep those in your sights. And then finally, one of the biggies is creating a genuine living wage for adults of all ages. We believe that's going to come through more in the upcoming first budgets. So we await to see that. Beyond that, there are some other very interesting changes coming. So the requirement, if you've got more than 250 employees, to move into statutory reporting, equality reporting, is going to be introduced. There's some views that there will be mandated pay rates. So from what I've read, the government is going to pick an industry, create an agreement with that industry, set it up, put pay rates in, and if that works well, then potentially use that as a template across other industries. So there's quite a lot that will herald potential change. I'm sure more than one of you may now have your head in your hands thinking, how to goodness are we going to deal with that? And I, in some ways, are probably feeling the same way. I would say here, and we talk about this a lot at the moment with our clients, as Mr. Mannering said, don't panic. You have to almost go back to the start of this presentation and think about making sure you've got the right things in place. If you are good employers and you're treating people fairly, the culture is positive, then actually these are things that you must be aware of, but that you shouldn't be worrying about. I don't recommend that you manage your business just based purely on the statutory requirement being the maximum thing to hit. You should be using that as a platform to make sure that the right things are in the right place, and ultimately your people are being treated well. But nonetheless, unfortunately, we all experience different risks at different times. So my recommendation to you is to start thinking ahead. We we don't know what's coming for certain, but it would be, I think, naive not to have these changes in mind. Um, the other thing to think about is if you are thinking about restructure, reorganization, or any of those things, have you got the right processes in? Could the proposed changes make a difference? Um, we certainly are starting to review our practices and processes and working with our clients to update handbooks and contracts, just as a starter, and then we will be, advising them once the new legislation arrives. And the other big thing, and I haven't touched purposefully on this through this, but I talked earlier about having the recruitment processes right. I think that's one of the really key takeaways, hopefully, for you, that get recruitment right, recruit the right people, make sure that the big statutory landmines in there, such as right to work, auto enrollment, right to get the pension, right, making sure the right policies are in place. As long as that's there, you're going to start off in a good place. But the other big thing that we find is that often managers aren't well trained to manage people. And you'll know, I'm sure, of instances where issues have arisen because managers may have lacked capability to deal with situations, may have left them because they just didn't see them coming. So the other thing, I think the smart thing to be doing at the moment is looking at your managers and saying, are they fit to essentially be the conduit that all of these things are going to need to come alive through, because they'll be obviously managing your people. So I guess just to finish before I open up with questions, I wanted to just put some good time in the end of this to give people the chance to ask questions uh, in a different way. This is how we see it. So if you really are looking just to get off the blocks, make sure that you're in the compliance space, this is where you should be. Operationally, as I've just explained, making sure you've got good practices, people are well trained, and strategically, if you are again a big organization or you're thinking beyond the statutory requirements, to be thinking about what is your people strategy in the future. Okay, I'm going to take a pause there. Appreciate that there was a lot probably to digest. So I'm going to take to the chat function. Please fire away with any questions that you have. There are some other resources we have to help you. I'll talk about those next. But yes, do please fire away with your questions. And they can be as random or as small or as large as you like. Always silence at this point. JR, great question. Uh, yes, I think JR. Certainly, making sure managers are aware of the processes is key. Absolutely right. So using your policies and your handbook to do that is a good starting point. At recruitment stage, you will want to have tested that they've got the experience that you need to manage employees, and that also beyond the employment law piece, that culturally they will manage in a way that suits your organization. And then practically, I find it's helpful to use team meetings, management meetings, to intersperse some maybe refresher training or talk about particular difficult sort of overarching issues that people might be experiencing, like an increase in mental health and well-being sort of challenges with employees. So practically, little and often, have the right things in place. That's the best way to deal with it. I think for new managers, if I may say, life's going to get a lot more difficult because, to be honest, so many managers don't get the training they need, and there's so much change coming, and they are at the sharp end that almost determine whether you pass or fail on a lot of this stuff. So focusing on your managers at the moment would be a great thing to do. So that's a good question there. Pleasure. Thank you. Fire away more questions. Um, can be small, can be big. Don't be shy. Has anyone gone off? Have you all gone off and just made tea? Okay, I'm going to move on a bit because I certainly don't want to waste your time. Best way of managing slightly dysfunctional team. Oh wow, yeah, great question. Best way of managing it is to first of all understand what's dysfunctional about it. Uh, it can often be the case that they're not being managed properly. Communication may be off. Expectations may not be set. There may be underlying currents that issues that need to be addressed. So the way I would do that, and it's a big question, but the way I'd start to do that is dig around to understand, in my mind, what is the issue, and then the best way to change them to functional is to engage them in that process to help them almost take on the challenge of moving into being a fully functioning team. Nolan, when having a multifunction workforce, corporate versus field, should you have an encompassing framework or slightly different ones for different job roles? That's a really great question. You can, I mean, if that kind of leads me to, that's a pay question in part for me. So you will have technical staff that maybe receive different pay to corporate staff. In my extensive corporate experience, it was always a bone of contention that one lot of people earned differently to the other lot of people. You'll never get around that, I don't think. But what you need to make sure is that the way that you plot your pay structures is transparent, legally compliant, obviously, and objective. So if it is challenged, even if people think they should earn £50 million and actually they're a part-time administrator that can only earn 10, at least you can show what the thinking was behind that. In that sort of multifunction workforce, I always think what's important is to set out the overarching principle, and we use competency frameworks for that. So behavioral frameworks, which is what we use to recruit, to retain, and to appraise. So I would think about behaviors because that's also where people management is most effective at behavioral level. And try and use parity as much as you can. I mean, the reality is it's very difficult, but there'll be one or two key principles you don't want to avoid. So paying fairly, being open culturally is really key. Communication's key because that takes away any distrust or may help take away distrust or uncertainty. But happy to chat about that, Nolan, because I've got quite a lot of experience in that space. Okay, really good questions. By the way, thank you for sharing. Okay, so in all of that, we are here to help. I didn't want to spend tons of time on this at the start, but just to give you a bit of background, my business looks after an extensive number of clients across an extensive, portfolio of industries. We work with entrepreneurs that are just starting up all the way to large organizations. The way we work is often through our monthly retained service, which is our advice line service where you can call up. We provide the handbooks, the employment law advice, or you can simply call us if you've got a tricky issue and you just want us to do a one-off piece of work for you. One of the great things about working with us, we are all highly qualified. We're not a call center operation. As hopefully you've seen, we know what we're talking about. I don't see us as a national competitor because we don't compete at that level. We're a very personal organization. We like to get to know our clients. It's the way we deal with our clients is very bespoke. Again, hopefully you've seen that we are very close to what's happening. And given my own experience, I like to make sure we provide not just the employment law advice, but the practical advice to go alongside that. We do extensive amounts of other things, so benefits. We do run management training programs very successfully and can support in all of the things that I've just talked about. Today I've really run through a lot. I've tried not to bog you down into the detail, but we are running in September a fuller session on this, and that's a morning session you can come along. It's a paid session, but you will receive from us a administration manual. We will be in person doing that. Sorry, the 11th of September is an online session. I made a mistake there. You can ask your questions. It's very interactive, lots of materials to take away to make sure that you are compliant. And on the 14th of October, we do commence our management training program, which is on our website just there. Beyond all of that, we have some great tools. So if you want to head over to the website, and we will send you this information, you can yourself go through a little audit we've created. It's quite cool, actually. It gives you a report at the end of it to show how compliant you are, the areas you might think about. And after all of those things, as I'm sure you have picked up, I love to talk. So we can talk about that. If you've got particular issues, I'm very happy to chat. All my contact details will be splashed all over everything. So do stay in touch. There's no obligation there. If you've got an issue you just want to kick around, then absolutely fine. As long as we're not on the phone for 3 hours, then there's that's sort of a free offer, if you like. So Erica, when do you think the point of sporadic single sick days should flag up a bigger conversation, and what's the best way to broaden it? Great conversation. So just in the interest of time, Erica, what I would suggest there is that you will be seeing the pattern. So I would be looking at, say, for example, the last 3 to 6 months. I would meet with the employee and I would talk to them about what is the reasons for these sporadic sick days. The thing with sickness is that what the textbook says is you don't manage the sickness, you manage the attendance. So the whole thing with return to work discussions and managing absence is getting the employee to understand they are expected to be at work. And if they've gone over the number of days that typically people are off sick, what are the reasons for that? And if there's no justifiable reason, then maybe starting a formal process to take them through disciplinary, for example. But I would urge you to make sure you have the return to work discussions, because people may be going through things that might, again, be a bit of a landmine if you dismiss them and they declare that actually there's a medical condition there that's considered a disability. So, and fairly, that's the other thing, Erica, is if you're going to look at absence for everybody. Don't just target one high and persistent. Pleasure. Okay, well, again, thank you so much for attending. We will be back in touch. We'll send you the slides and a recording, and I will be back in touch with you. But in the meantime, don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything else we can do. Thank you.